Good morning. My name is Irina Velicu. I'm the SESH coordinator of the project, the Horizon Europe project, GreenPaths. You already know that this is a webinar, the sixth webinar organized within the framework of this project. These webinars are dedicated to understanding better the impacts, the social, economic, and other forms of impacts of the so-called green transition and the policies of the green transition. Today we have great speakers. I'm honored to be here with them. I'm very happy that they participate and that they accepted. So thank you to the speakers as well. And thank you for our moderator today also, Lindsay Wisan. Thank you for accepting. Lindsay is a campaigner for Friends of the Earth for the resource justice and alternative economies. So I will give her the floor immediately. And for those of you who are still registering, thank you again. And remember, you will be able to ask questions at the end of this roundtable. It will be sort of a debate between the speakers, and you will have the time to enter into communication with them. So thank you again, everybody. And Lindsay, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning to you all. Thank you for opening the webinar, Irina. So today we're tackling a very critical issue, which is extractivism, or the exploitation of natural resources, which now more than ever is driving geopolitics, as you probably know, see from the news the past weeks and months. It's on the top of the political agenda again. Rather than looking at the broad scope of all critical raw materials, we're going to zoom in on the mining of a specific mineral, lithium. Most of you probably know that lithium is required for batteries production and used mostly in electric vehicles. Some studies predict that Europe will be needing 18 times more lithium by 2030, 60 times more by 2050 to meet the expected demand. So this increased demand is leading to a rush for lithium and a wide range of impacts on communities and the environment. And that is why we've invited 3 speakers from different countries with lithium deposits to explain about the reality of lithium mining on the ground, and particularly how extractivism is creating sacrifice zones in their countries. So just a heads up before we move on to the introductions of the speakers. We don't have much time to clarify all the terminology. So if you're not familiar with certain terms and would like a definition, please ask for clarification in the chat. Then someone from the team can answer. So whether it's critical raw materials or extractivism, just a bit more clarification can be provided there rather than one-on-one. So about the program for today, it consists of 3 parts. Firstly, a short introduction to the case studies by each of the speakers. Then a roundtable where we will go more into depth into specific issues. Then the third part will be the Q&As to give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions to the speakers. So to all of you participants, you will need to have a bit of patience before we open up the floor for questions. Okay, all right. So that said, let's start with a basic introduction to the case studies, just for everyone to be on the same page about the basic facts of lithium mining in the respective countries. To start off with, I'd like to introduce Mariana Riquito, who is a PhD student at the University of Amsterdam and also a researcher at the University of Coimbra, correct? I know that Mariana is not only just an academic sitting behind a desk, she is closely involved in the struggle of the local community in Cobos de Barros. So she can share with us firsthand about what's happening on the ground. Marianne, I will give you the floor to share with us a quick overview of lithium mining in the north of Portugal.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, the GreenPaths project, for the invitation and for organizing this. I'm also very excited to be hearing and dialoguing with Nina and Ramon, and thank you all of you for attending this morning webinar. I hope it will be worth it. And as Lindsay said, I will be very shortly introducing the Portuguese lithium rush. This photo that you see here, this beautiful, or hopefully you see it, this beautiful landscape is located in Barroso, a region located in the northern part of Portugal, and which was classified by the United States as World Agricultural Heritage in 2018. And similarly, at that time, the Portuguese government has been actively granting licenses for prospecting or exploring lithium, as well as other critical minerals in this region, but also elsewhere. But the focus on this region is because in this region alone, there are about 15 licenses, both for exploration and for prospecting. And it is also in this region that the most advanced lithium project is predicted. This project is in the hands of a British stock exchange company named Savannah Resources, whose logo is enabling Europe's energy transition, precisely because it is through this wave of the energy and climate policies that new businesses and extraction of minerals is being justified and labeled. And what you see in this slide here is a simulation of what the project would look like. So the project consists in an open pit lithium extraction in four open pit mines, several waste tailing dams, roads, a processing unit which would work 24 hours a day for every day of the week, roads and other industrial infrastructures needed for the maintenance of this project, in a total area of 593 hectares, so about 600 hectares, although new documents from the company already predict an enlargement of this area of up to 900 hectares. So this is what the company aims to do in this region. And since May 2023, the company has received a favorable conditional environmental impact assessment. And as part of those conditions, the company has to conduct more prospecting work, so more surveying for knowing how many minerals deposits are actually there. But since the company has very limited access to lands because of the strong local opposition happening on the ground since 2017, and also because of the fact that most of the land in this region is communally owned and people are not granting the company access to this land, the company had to resort to an administrative easement, which was granted by the government in December last year, so about 3 months ago. And at this moment, the company is conducting more prospecting work as part of hoping to meet the conditions asked by the Portuguese government, and then to receive the final environmental licensing, has to start producing and mining in 2027. So here are some photos of the damages already being made, the scars already being made on the body of the earth in this region. As you can see, these are pictures from the prospecting works, and we have been reporting heavy environmental and ecological impacts, namely on water depletion, but also on noise and dust pollution. And the grabbing and seizure of these communal lands, and not only communal lands actually, but also private lands, which were grabbed by this administrative easement granted 3 months ago, are a direct threat to the local way of life, which depends on agriculture, beekeeping, pastoralism, but more broadly so relies on these forests and on these waters, and so locals are indeed resisting and contesting this project because they see it has an existential threat to their way of life and has something hurting this strong connection that they have to these forests and to these waters. So just to finish with some photos of some protests, one here on the left happening in the village of Covas do Barroso and the other one in Lisbon. And just to finish off by saying that indeed, since 2017, so it's been 7 years, that local communities have created a strong local opposition, relying on themselves, but also on local authorities, who are a crucial actor in fighting the national government's policies. But they have also created strong networks of alliances in Portugal and outside of Portugal. Since 2021, an international camp is organized in Covas do Barroso, and the last one has gathered about 500 people. And it is also in this camp that I have met, for example, Lindsay and Ramon, and some of us from Covas have also been to Serbia and have met with Nina. And so just to finish off, has also giving the floor to the next speakers to say that Barroso is not an isolated case, as we will see with our roundtable. And the resistance to the Portuguese lithium rush is also made in connection and in parallel to other sacrifice zones in the making in Europe and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana, for sharing that. I think it makes the reality of extractivism very, very tangible. So now we're going to move on to Nina. Nina is a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford. Nina, can you share with us some basic facts about lithium mining in the Jadar Valley?
Yeah, absolutely. And hello, everyone from my side as well. Thank you so much for organizing it. And thank you, Mariana, for that great introduction into what's going on in Portugal. I will start with just a few seconds of introducing myself and talking a little bit about my positionality and where I come from. As Lindsay said, I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford, very close to the completion of the PhD, but I also see myself as an activist, very involved in the local struggle and in multiple different collectives fighting against extractivism, especially green extractivism, and especially in the Balkans. And one more important thing I want to highlight is that even though my family is originally from Serbia, I was born and raised in Prague, so I'm a Serbian diaspora, and I returned to Serbia for my research, and also that was when I got to know all the local communities and the activists. But it's important for me to highlight that, first of all, these questions are very close to my heart because they also have a lot to do with leaving and staying and the potential dangers of being displaced. But also, second of all, to highlight that indeed I am not from the region and I am not in any way trying to speak in the name of the communities. But moving on to the situation, I will start by sharing just this one photo. Can I get a nod from someone that you can see it? Yes, perfect, thank you. So this is a photo from December 2021, taken by a Serbian photographer, Marko Ristovic. I think I want to start with this photo because what you need to understand about the situation in Serbia is, first of all, just the sheer resistance to the proposed lithium mine. So what you're seeing on this photo is basically the peak of the protests, which have been at the time ongoing for several weeks. So this is autumn 2021, extending all the way to January 2022. And if you can see, what you're seeing are buses and cars being completely blocked by a mass of people. So this is a blockade of a highway that is running through Belgrade, which was attended by several tens of thousands of people. And I think it really illustrates just the sheer resistance and the strength of refusal for something like this to go on. So I did want to start with this photo. I will move it away now to continue talking about what is going on in Serbia. The story, more or less, if it has to have a beginning, we can say it might start in 2004, when Rio Tinto, one of the biggest mining corporations in the world, quote unquote, discovered a completely new mineral, which was later classified and named as Yadarite, named after the local river Yadar, which runs through the Yadar Valley. At the time, it made global news for a very different reason. Somehow, they found that it has a chemical composition which is almost identical to the fictional kryptonite from the Superman franchise. So you could see all of these science news of the real kryptonite having been discovered. But of course, its real usage became evident many years later now with the lithium rush when the company has moved towards opening up the mine. So in 2019, 2020, they started buying out the houses in the Yadar Valley, or at least trying to. It's a rural area with several villages, but it's a populated area and a very fertile area. Most of the people there work as farmers and agriculture workers. And at one point, some of them decided not to sell their houses, and they decided not to be displaced, and they decided not to leave their land, which they have been on for generations. This we can really see as the beginning of resistance. And as you saw from the photo, in just a few months, it escalated on a national scale. And it was really something, and still is, that is what's important to highlight. It is one of the most important issues that are still being discussed in Serbia. So following those protests, the big ones that you saw on the picture, in January 2022, the government was forced to cancel the project officially, which was one of the very few moments when the authoritarian regime of Aleksandar Vučić was actually forced to give way to protest. It was at the time because the elections were coming up in just 3 months, so the project got canceled. But of course, none of the locals or the activists believed for a second that it was over. And then indeed, this July last year, 2024, the cancellation was canceled. So the project was reinstated, and in a very rushed manner, a memorandum of understanding was signed with the EU. And this is really crucial because the memorandum which was signed is supposed to establish the cooperation between the EU and Serbia in terms of all the mineral deposits, but also the entire value chain of producing batteries and creating electric vehicles. And what I really want to highlight here, that apart from all of the representatives of Serbian ministries and politicians and the representatives of the EU Commission and German administration and all of those, who else was present were, of course, the CEOs of Mercedes-Benz, of Rio Tinto, and also of Innobat, which is one of the biggest battery producing companies, and many others. So I think it's becoming very evident that this so-called green transition is much more about profit of individual companies who are very explicitly signing it in memorandums of understanding with the governments. But of course, just a few days after that, another mass wave of protests erupted. Several people got arrested, and as you probably know, there is now another massive wave of protests going on in Serbia, this time led by students. And yeah, I will leave it here for now. The resistance is ongoing, and we will be talking about that much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Yes, indeed, the demonstrations have been massive and even have also reached Brussels quite recently. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ramon, who is a PhD candidate from Chile at the Metropolitan Autonomous University in Mexico. Just like the other speakers, he's far from being just another theoretical researcher, but also an activist and the founder of Fundación Tanti, an organization that promotes the protection of wetlands in the indigenous territories of the Atacama region. Roman, I believe you had to wake up quite early to attend this webinar, so thank you for that. We're grateful that you can share with us your perspective about extractivism outside of Europe. So yeah, go ahead and tell us what you think are the basic facts that we should know before diving into the roundtable.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Lindsay, for the invitation. I'm very happy also to see Mariana and Nina. Yeah, actually, my activism work started in the Atacama Salt Flat, the Atacama Desert, north of Chile. But I've also had the opportunity, actually, the privilege to meet organizations both in Jadar and in Bagoso. So I'm very thrilled actually to share this space with all of you and the audience. So just to be quick, and since this reality is a bit different, I'm going to share some images very quickly just to illustrate a little bit the context. So the misnamed or so-called lithium triangle, maybe you've heard about it. It's an existing reality, especially in the case of Chile. So the conflict is more related to, or has been more related to expansion of already existing projects. Maybe you know about this. But first of all, I think that it's very important to understand salt floods as agro ecosystems more than lithium mines, right? So has been part of our cause to show the social, cultural, and natural diversity and complexity and wealth value of these systems and the existence of ancestral agropastoral practices that actually have been there in the territory for thousands of years and have shown that a sustainable mode of living is possible even in very dry spaces and territories. So the conflict associated to lithium mines started I'd say maybe before in 2016, but there was one big protest actually that took place in Atacama Salt Flat. This banner actually was made by me and other comrades at the moment. We joined a protest that was organized by indigenous communities at that time, and it was in response to an agreement signed between Corfo, it's an agency, the state agency, and SQM, one of the companies that has been operating in the salt flat and has been linked actually to Pinochet's dictatorship. So it was a very polemic agreement, and it was rejected for different reasons. More broadly, like nationally, because of this link with the dictatorship, and also because of the renationalization project that always in the mind of people in Chile, as it happened with the copper in the Salvador Allende's government. But at the local level, and this is very important, the demands were a bit different. It was more about water, about participation, and recognition of indigenous communities and their rights to be part of this process and to be consulted. So there's been different moments. This was one. Then there's been more social movements against the expansion of lithium mining. And this has had also different stages of protest and conflict. And now more recently, actually, the conflict is more around the implementation of the current government's national lithium strategy. So lithium, it's a very sad reality. It's very big. It's been the amounts of brines and water they extract are at rates like around 1,500 liters per second for SQM, for example, 442 liters per second for Albemarle, for example, plus fresh water for the operations. So the amounts of water plus copper mines extracting fresh water as well can reach around, I think, it's more than 180 million liters of water, for example, from the basin. So it's very different from other contexts, but I think it's very interesting that we can exchange because although this is brine mining, and maybe in both Portugal and Serbia, the projects are more like rock mining based. The impacts you can see, you can kind of like imagine, and actually rock mining normally needs a lot of fresh water, but you know all of this. So just to finish, I think that something that is really important is to stress the importance, or why it's so interesting to speak about of green sacrifice zones. This is a term that has been used in Chile since a long time, and it has been mostly related to thermoelectric power plants. But now the communities have been using it to denounce the expansion of lithium mining and also new energy projects, also like green hydrogen. So it's a concept that we use with a lot of care because it can be reductive in the terms of like acknowledging that some territories are for sacrifice, or it's normal that some sacrifice is needed for whether for development, economic growth, or in this case for the energy transition, especially in Europe. But it's something that has been also said and shown already by the other panelists. But what is important is also to show that the green sacrifice zones are resisted, and these resistances are local and are also global. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it here. Thank you. And
Yes, thank you very much, Ramon. Just wanted to clarify that the participants are not able to share comments in a chat function. The chat function has been disabled, so you can only submit questions through the Q&A tool, which ideally we will only open after the roundtable, because now the speakers will all have the opportunity to elaborate and clarify specific issues, which might already answer some of the questions you may have. All right, so having now seen this overview of three different case studies in different countries and even continents in varying contexts, I would like to try to identify some of the similarities, because of course there are many commonalities besides the fact that you're all struggling with, or those communities are struggling with the challenges posed and the impacts created by extractivism. So we have the overexploitation of raw materials, in this case lithium reserves, whether it's brine or hard rock, for mainly economic interests at the expense of local communities, right? Because the mining, which is already happening in Portugal, in Chile, and is planned in Portugal and Serbia, it has impact on the local communities in different ways, as already illustrated by Mariana and Nina, without the meaningful engagement or consent of local communities, and a threat of destroying natural environments. So of course, it's not the goal of this webinar to discuss a definition of sacrifice zones. Ramon, you already gave your view on how to interpret this term. I would like to ask Mariana if you think, would you say that what I just described as being the similarities between the case studies, is that a correct summary of how lithium mining, how extractivism is creating sacrifice zone in your country? Or are there any other driving forces that you would like to highlight or elaborate?
Yes, thank you. Yes, of course, there are a lot of similarities. As I was listening to Nina and Ramon, and I was seeing the photo that Ramon, one of the photos that Ramon shared, I was reminded of something happening also on the ground in Portugal right now that I didn't mention, which is the constant intimidation the constant policing and threats that local communities and especially local environmental defenders and land defenders are being subjected to. Since the last year and a half, there has been a semi-permanent police patrolling in this village. For the past 3 years, there's also surveillance, camera surveillance in the area where the mining company has an office. And since the last year and a half, they have also hired private security. So all of these stories that we usually hear in the context of Latin America or outside of the EU, they are also happening in the EU. So I would also say that this militarization, and of course I use this, and this is where I want to go next, with a lot of care, because I think the scales and the intensity of extraction, of militarization, of manipulation, of threats, of subalternization, they are of course very different. So I would be wary to bluntly compare the Portuguese scenario with the Chilean scenario or even with the Serbian scenario, because of course geopolitically the structures and the driving forces between these different countries are very different, of course. But at the same time, it is important to establish the similarities to make visible how also within the EU, there's also all these peripheries, of course, and Portugal is already a peripheral country within the EU, and Barroso is a peripheral country within Portugal. And this peripheralization is what is intrinsic and the prerequisites for creating a sacrifice zone, right? You need to create inferior, subaltern, sacrificable bodies and territories in order for them to be deemed justifiable of extraction. So I would say that this is, of course, the construction that is happening in Barroso. These people are indeed, this territory and these people are indeed being constructed as subaltern, has inferior, and therefore we can justify extracting them of their what companies and states only see as mere resources, but also extract them of their emotional and create a sort of psychological warfare in this region with the permanent police presence and the threats and the judicial harassment as well. So all this to say that I think the term of sacrifice zone is useful to create these comparisons, but I would still use it with a lot of care, especially because it emerges from this Latin American context, as Ramon was also saying. And I think when we use it in the context of Europe, we always need to be wary of the difference in power politics and geopolitics, and the intensity, even the scales of extraction and the intensity of extraction are quite different. I mentioned 600 hectares, which is of course huge for this region, but I know that in the Atacama Desert or in other parts in the lithium triangle, we're talking about extractions which are far beyond sites, which one shouldn't justify the other, of course, but just to say that I would use this concept within the European context, within a EU context, with some care.
Yeah, you raised a very important point, which is the geographical location of these areas, which is indeed in the periphery, whether it is periphery of a continent or a country. So these are geographical zones that are easily ignored or overlooked by the decision makers, by urban consumers, because they are simply very far removed from their day-to-day reality, thereby creating sinks for pollution, or zones of social malpractices. Having said that, I mean, there are, of course, international or national regulations to limit all types of socio-environmental impacts, and these safeguards should be in place, right? Ideally, at least within Europe, that we have a regulatory framework. Now, Serbia is not officially part of the EU, but yeah, with the negotiations are supposed to enter the EU, do you think there are enough safeguards now or in the future to prevent negative impacts? Because that is also what people often refer to, that there are international standards to minimize these impacts. But yeah, and if they don't work, why don't they work effectively? Nina.
Thank you, Lindsay, for that question. And thank you, Mariana, for what you said before. I couldn't agree more. So I will also try to build up on that a little bit as well. Serbia indeed is not part of the EU, but of course it is located in Europe geographically, which is why I think it adds a very interesting dimension to all of these questions. Because one thing we could see, for example, is in the, just a few years ago, the company has been referring to this mine, potential mine, as being at the doorsteps of Europe, which to me really captures in one sentence so many of these dynamics, because it is this understanding that you are European, but also not as European. But later, when the company would be referring to the economic benefits of Serbia, it would refer to Serbia as being the heart of the European green transition. And I think it's so fascinating how a space or a place like Serbia or the Balkans or Southeast Europe, Western Balkans, whichever category you want to use, can be both, inside and outside, depending on how that is convenient to the international companies. Of course, Serbia is a candidate country to the EU, but I would strongly dispute that that presents any sort of advantage. If anything, people are now very much worried that opening up the Yadar mine has become an unofficial requirement for entering the EU, especially considering the pressures that have been ongoing and escalating since last summer. So I also wanted to highlight what Mariana was saying, because especially following the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding with the EU, which could potentially be interpreted as sort of coming closer to the EU, of course, what happened was an absolute escalation of violence towards the local communities and towards activists, because they got organizing even more. There was a really big protest just a month after the signing, but following that, several people were arrested, dozens were detained and questioned for hours. Members of academic community even received death threats for having the courage to speak up against this potential mine. I do see that as one driving force of potential sacrifice zones that really are something that are perhaps in common. Another one I wanted to highlight is, of course, this continuous portrayal of the local communities as uneducated or misinformed, or simply, in the case of Serbia, even paid by Russia or sort of foreign agents. So the way these geopolitical forces play out, I also sometimes find fascinating, because we have now seen this case of the EU and the US in particular accusing the activists of being paid by Russia. But then, of course, the Serbian president, when speaking to the Serbian population, he would say that it's the Western agents who are paying the activists to sort of disrupt the order. So it's this liminality of being both a Western agent and a Russian spy, and being both inside and outside of Europe. I really wanted to highlight also what Mariana was saying about sacrifice zones. I would not consider the other region a sacrifice zone at all, at least not yet, because there is no mine. And to the best of my knowledge, there also won't be any mine, because the resistance is so strong. Of course, we've highlighted a few times before, what is really crucial are the solidarities that are being formed across the global north and the global south and the EU and the rest of the world. And I do see that as really important. I think it's crucial in these contexts to understand that It's not the same to be talking about the global south and Europe and the EU, but it is also by looking for the commonalities and creating these networks of solidarity that something so huge and momentous as this new drive for extractivism can be resisted.
Yes, thank you, Nina. I think what has been mentioned several times before by all of the panelists is the fact that the benefits are not shared in an equitable way, not necessarily benefiting the local or even national populations. While governments and other actors argue that lithium mining is needed for the green transition. So yeah, I'm curious to know from Ramon, because there the mining has been taking place already for a long time. To what extent is the transition actually happening in your country? Can it be regarded? To what extent are the benefits distributed from the extraction of lithium resources? Yeah. So can you say a bit more about that, Ramon?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, actually, it's also very interesting to think about the transition itself. So when we talk about green transition, I mean, whose transition we're talking about, right? That's the first question. Who kind of like have access to the environmental or the expected environmental benefits of this transition. I wouldn't say that is the Atacama Desert or is Chile whatsoever. Actually, this is something that can seem quite obvious, and this is also connected with what Mariana said about these subalternate subjects, where it's normal to think of Europe as a place where transition can happen, but nobody really wants or expects an actual transition to happen in our countries, as if we were just in a global position of like mineral suppliers or now energy suppliers, right? That's our place and that's our contribution to the energy transition globally. We are now, well, we have different interesting and worrying things to say about this. In San Pedro de Atacama, like we have communes, the district where lithium mines are located. Energy comes from gas, for example, like and a very small amount from solar panels. Very small, and it's not actually not always working. It has no stability. And it was a promise of what during the at the beginning of the expansion of lithium mining to build solar plants for a clean energy production, but it didn't happen. Okay, regionally, we are actually now at this very moment working with communities on the coast because thermal power plant that was supposed to close in the context of the national transition plan was supposed to close. Now they are trying to expand their operations. So these thermal coal plants uh, import the coals through the same ports that are used for the exit of lithium, for example, and are the same ports actually that are used for the entrance of all the components and parts for the wind plants and solar plants, which are huge now. So actually, that's why we are actually considering the use of this term of green sacrifice zones in the region of Antofagasta, because it's actually like of all limits that you can imagine, right? Then when we speak about economic benefits that are also a promise, and there's also an old premise of extractivism, and that's actually why some scholars speak about neo-extractivism, and now we are also speaking about green extractivism, which is kind of like different stages of extractivism, but are intrinsically connected to the adaptation of capital in the context of crisis, which is not just a climate crisis, of course, it's a systemic and total civilizational crisis. So the companies have established different conditions with parts of local communities for benefit sharing. And although these agreements can actually benefit some groups of communities, maybe the distribution is not something that companies actually can really manage. And so here what we see, it's like a lack of presence of state, and in most of cases, companies are left to negotiate directly with communities, producing some, I'd say, like internal conflicts at some point. So a lot of people are left out of these agreements. So I think that there is a lot to say about that. It would take a lot of time to see it in detail, but just to say that benefit sharing agreements uh, can indeed benefit the groups that sign these agreements, but not necessarily all the inhabitants, whether indigenous or not indigenous of a region or a territory. Then we have in Chile like a new law, it's like a royalty law that is supposed also to produce a better regional or territorial distribution of the income that comes from mining projects, but then there is a big gap between the distribution of these economic benefits and the implementation of public policies that can actually really benefit and have actual impacts on the population.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. Maybe that's also how do you say, not a precursor, but it's a warning of what other countries that are not have not yet turned into sacrifice zones, what they can expect, what is realistic when companies and decision makers promise added value and benefit sharing to what will happen actually in practice has always to be seen. Then based on all of your interventions, it seems that there is both localized and widespread resistance against the mines. So you have, of course, at the local level, the grassroots level, but also it has been there is support from national organizations. To what extent is there a meaningful public debate about the negative impacts in your countries? And if there is not a widespread a national public debate, which I think is the case for Serbia, given the scale of the massive protest, it seems it's quite high on everybody's it's on everybody's radar. Is this also the case in Portugal, for example? Would you say that there is that the opposition is not just localized but also national, Marianne?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a tricky one. I would say that thanks to the local opposition and to local resistance and local resilience that for the past 7 years has not put their arms down, a national debate was forced. I believe from of course analyzing governmental documents, but also some media appearances from governmental and company representatives, that no resistance was expected back in 2017, and no continuous resilient resistance was expected for the past 7 years. So I do think that, and I say this because the Portuguese government since 2016, it has in the meantime changed, and it has also the former prime minister was even forced to resign due to a corruption scandal linked to hydrogen, lithium, and a data center. So clearly an encapsulation of the trio, the combo of the so-called green and digital transition. But going back to 2016, the goal back then of the government was they were already selling licenses abroad in mining conventions. They were already talking about the Portuguese lithium to investors. And so I think resistance was not expected. But I think because of the resilience and the strength and the courage of this local population, a national debate was forced. And I would say that now lithium mining is one of the most debated controversies in Portugal, especially when it comes to the energy transition. I would say it's the most widely debated and spoken about when compared, for example, to other local controversies and populations fighting, for example, against power plants or wind turbines offshore. Lithium extraction is by far the one that is most debated and has received extensive media coverage and also academic attention. But I think that comes from the strength of this local resistance, because I think only very recently have we seen the climate justice movement, for example, or big national environmental organizations clearly taking a stance and clearly positioning themselves alongside these communities. It took them a long time to openly, I would say, openly speak about lithium extraction and the socio-ecological impacts and injustices of the current energy policies. And they had to do this because local communities didn't give up, and because they have managed to create such extensive networks of solidarity among with other countries, with other communities, that these movements in Portugal and these organizations in Portugal, of course, could not take a stand. So I would say that right now, lithium extraction is definitely on the agenda of the climate justice movement, of environmental organizations, but it does still remain a topic that is mostly brought forward or put forward by the local communities and the people who are in solidarity with these local communities. I would actually also expect other actors to take a more fierce or vocal and position in what comes to this.
Yes. To liven up the discussion a bit, because it seems everybody is very much aligned, I'd like to pose a somewhat provocative question to Ramon and Nina, because being outside of the EU, I was wondering, what do you think of the argument that the EU should be less dependent on import from third countries? Because I think it's about 80% that the EU imports from Chile in terms of unprocessed lithium. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's quite a large share. Wouldn't it be more efficient to source minerals that in Europe that are needed for its own industries, rather than offshoring the impacts on other territories?
Do you want to start, Ramon, or should I?
Yeah, why not? This is something that it's been, I think, in the collective discussions for a while, especially when these more global networks have been emerging. I think that from an international solidarity perspective, we don't really want like that lithium mining just moved to another place or to another territory, right? We think that it's important that we understand that no territory is sacrificable. And for this, I think that we also need to consider the scale of the extraction. This is something I think that Mariana mentions. Uh, Only the Atacama salt flat today supplies like nearly 26% of the global supply of lithium, right? So this is absolutely, over any, logic, scale. You cannot expect that just one ecosystem, resist all that without being destructive. The other point is the demand. So we need to move forward, and even the discussion at some point should go beyond extractivism, because this is something that we say, like, thinking and acting and imagining the future beyond extractivism. Extractivism, global extractivism. First, we need to, of course, stop the big pressure that the European Union is putting on our countries and our territories. Also, in like EU-based projects or European region-based projects, like with this level of violence and at this scale. Um, and maybe regarding the last question, and also, but it's also connected with this, is I think that this critique to extractivism, to the problem of lithium mining cannot be resolved just with better policies or with better standards, or with more shared benefits. That's not the problem. The problem is the impacts, is the scale, is the global structure, the colonial structures that we are actually witnessing, living, and resisting. So just to finish this, something that I forgot to mention before about the benefit sharing is that in the context of the Atacama Sulfate, at least, the communities that have received these benefits have also built local and community-based capacities for monitoring the salt flats, the water, and to follow like legal strategies. Something very interesting is that in spite of all the benefits, even the communities that are benefited, they have actually rejected every single new mining project in the territory since then, since the benefits sharing agreements were signed, whether lithium or copper. So that means that there is no social license for mining, and mining has always been forced into the territories through violence or in periods like the dictatorship in Chile. But when you have proper participation, when you have like rights acknowledged and recognized for communities, the rejection is something that all territories in all cases have in common. So nobody really is willing or is accepting to be transformed into like or seeing the territories transform into green sacrifice zones today, and they shouldn't.
Thank you. Nina, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you for that brilliant question. I will start by trying to debunk the myth that there is a green transition going on. I think it's absolutely not the case that we are seeing any green transition currently ongoing. That's the first myth. Just looking at the numbers of renewable energy, what we see is that they barely cover, even though, of course, there has been such a massive expansion, solar panels everywhere, electric vehicles everywhere. They barely cover the rise of demand in the past few years. So fossil fuels continue to grow every year with the only exception of coal. And just looking at the graph of what the energy usage currently looks like, I really don't think we can speak of any green transition. What we can speak of is the green addition, because what is happening is that just more and more energy is being added to the already massive consumption, which of course is incredibly unequal and unjust. It's the countries in the global north that are responsible for the biggest chunk of that energy consumption, but it is the first thing I wanted to address. And the second thing I want to address is what I would say the myth that lithium is needed for the green transition, knowing that no green transition is happening now. But looking at all of the projections, which of course are always imperfect and impartial and very difficult, what comes out of things like the International Energy Agency Data Explorer for lithium in particular, in all the different scenarios, including the net zero emission scenario by 2040 or 2050, 80% of that already massive expansion of lithium is supposed to be used only for the electric vehicles. And that means that, you know, all of the technology, phones, the laptop from which I'm calling everything, it's a drop in the sea compared to the electric vehicles and how much of that is going to be used, is supposedly going to need lithium. Of course, part of that are buses and things like public transport, but that is a really, really small drop compared to things like the individual automobility and the massive rise of electric SUVs and all of those things. So I really wanted to highlight this because I think it's on a lot of people's minds, things like that, yeah, we need lithium, and with the right regulation, with the fair sharing of benefits, it can somehow be done in an equitable way. I think another thing that really needs to be busted as a myth is that somehow the EU has these incredible environmental standards. You know, you often hear this like moral pedestal of the best environmental standards in the world, and somehow we can do this so much better than you know, anyone else in the global south. What is really happening is the opposite. With the adoption of the critical raw materials, we're seeing a massive wave of deregulation. And just one example I want to highlight as one of the most shocking ones I heard of is just this past December in Austria, where there is also a lithium mining project. The local government decided that they simply don't need the environmental impact assessment. So there just won't be an environmental impact assessment. Of course, the local environmental groups have disputed the decision, but I think that just goes to show what we're really talking about now with these policies, such as the Critical Raw Materials Act, and the overall deregulation of the mining sector in the EU. I think it's completely undisputable that the way things are organized right now are deeply, deeply unjust, and that the EU especially, but also Europe as a whole, is reliant on mining and extractivism and the creation of sacrifice zones across the global south. But what we're seeing just with the sheer expansion is that opening any mine in Europe is not going to mean that anywhere else there is going to be a closing down of a mine. It's such a massive expansion. I think it's really difficult just to understand the scale. With the onshoring and nearshoring, what the Critical Raw Materials Act is also doing is that it's not only supporting the opening of the mines in the EU, but also out of the EU. So that's not just Serbia, but the memorandums of understanding just in the past few years have been signed also with the places like Rwanda or Greenland or even Chile, and of course Ukraine. So we're seeing this massive push to just open the mines everywhere. And I think it is really crucial to take a step back. And I wanted to follow up on something that I think Mariana was also pointing at. I do see a big gap in the involvement of especially green environmental movements and climate movements in supporting the anti-extractivism movement, because I think the discourse is so strong that, you know, at least something is happening, and at least there are going to be a few electric vehicles. And it's so difficult to get out of this urgency mindset and the anxiety of the climate crisis. But I think now more than ever, it's so crucial to understand that what's going on is not a green transition by any any way of measuring that. It's a massive co-optation by the mining corporations, automobile industry, and of course several politicians who are turning very rapidly towards the far right and towards the deregulation of the entire industries for the sake of profit and nothing else.
Thank you for your strong contribution, Nina. And this is a good point to move on to the Q&A section of this webinar. I'm happy to see so many questions in the Q&A. It's clear that the panelists have incited a lot of interest and engagement of the participants. However, given the fact that we have about 20 minutes time or less, we can't answer all of them in detail. What I will do now is I will go through them one by one, but we cannot discuss each of them elaborately. So I will check if the question is still relevant. And if not, continue to the next, but I will also try to assign the questions to the different panelists so that if there is something additional you would like to comment in relation to the question, you can type the answer directly. I believe every panelist and also Irina and Marcus can answer the questions, so that way everybody gets served as good as possible. So the first question is about how to reconcile industrial transition with social and local concerns. Okay, so here Anna Müller was referring to industrial transition, not just the green transition, but of course the two go hand in hand because the green transition is seen as a way to reindustrialize. I think the panelists have already touched upon the fact that it's hard to reconcile, and the priority should be to recognize, to acknowledge the social and local concerns, and engage them as much, and to engage local communities as much as possible. Mariana, could you answer that question in writing, please? And then we move on to the next.
I would prefer not to answer in writing just because we have 15 minutes left. I think we can all read the questions, and some are quite alike. I can try to I don't know, get them a bit together. Sorry, there are a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, I will move on to the next question. For those of you who have written a lot, I'm not going to repeat everything that is in the Q&A. That's the text that you have shared with us. So the next question is about the global rhetoric about the urgent need for renewable energy. What discussions are happening at the local community level around when to resist mining, when to allow mining. Okay, so Nina has already addressed the problems with the rhetorics based around the green transition and debunked some of the myths around that.
Lindsay, sorry, I can try to start giving some comments which hopefully will reply to different questions and also to build on what Nina was saying. And thank you so much, Nina. I think it's really important, and I see from the different questions that the standpoint are several myths that Nina tried to debunk. So this first one, this myth of the green transition, and that Nina so well debunked, saying that what we're witnessing is an expansion of energy, an addition of new sources of energy. Then the second one, this myth in the need for lithium, I would like to add just because I see some questions that relate to that. As Nina was saying, the only reason why the EU predicts that we need, for example, 60 times more lithium by 2050 is because the beginning of the equation is that we need more electric cars and we need to replace all vehicles by electric cars. But there's an estimate that was done by the Environmental European Bureau saying that even if 5 fossil fuel cars were replaced by just 1 electric car, the need for lithium would reduce in half. So the need for lithium and cobalt would reduce in half. So we can see precisely that this need for lithium is also a construction, and that is based on a policy that demands more and more rather than reducing. And this thinking about this question, how to reconcile industrial transition with social and local concerns, I mean, precisely, it's not about reconciling, but about taking a complete different policies, a complete different beginning of the equation. I think we need to shrink the economic sectors and economic activities which are ecologically destructive and which create superfluous needs and superfluous goods. Because with that, the estimates for the so-called demand and need would reduce and would shrink abruptly. Then I would like to touch very quickly on the myth of European exceptionalism that Nina also tried to debunk, and precisely with the Critical Raw Materials Act that someone also mentioned in the chat here, it is clear that what we're seeing is a deregulation, a complete deregulation of environmental frameworks. And for you to have an idea, the Portuguese project owned by Savannah Resources that I mentioned was analyzed by a hydrologist named Stephen Emmerman, and the method of the waste tailing dam that the mining company predicts to use would be illegal in 4 Latin American countries. And the mining laws that we have, for example, in the Iberian Peninsula in Portugal and Spain have not been revised. I mean, are still the same since our dictatorship. So this idea that in Europe we do it better and we do it safer is also a myth. And then I would like to add on to what Nina was saying, but I would like to take it a bit further, is that we also need to debunk this myth that separates fossil fuel-based energy with so-called renewable energy. Because what we know is that all the so-called renewable energies, solar power plants, wind turbines, they rely not only on extractivism, but on fossil fuel. All of the wind turbines, all of the solar panels, all of the lithium-ion batteries, they need not just minerals, but to mine those minerals, we needed fossil fuel-powered tractors or ships to take these minerals from one side of the planet Earth to the other, then to process it in highly industrialized technologies and centers.
Yes.
So we also need, sorry, yeah.
Well, it's all very, very relevant what you're saying.
Go ahead.
But yeah, we were trying to answer the questions. Could you please indicate which of the questions you have just answered so we can focus on the others?
Because they're all very good and large. I was trying to give some general comments. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, because we were stopped at the second question by Charlize Tomaselli, who was actually raising an interesting point. So because we still need mineral resources, not at the scale that governments and corporations are pushing for. Clearly, we need sufficiency and reduction measures. But when is mining allowed, under which conditions? I don't know. I believe you did not address that, Mariana, just now. But before we answer the question, Ramon, do you want to answer the second question? Can we move on, or is it something
Yeah,
else?
I want to answer Sayuri Andrade. For me, it's very hard to read and listen at the same time. Also, English is
Yes.
not a mother tongue, so apologize for that. But there is a comrade from Peru raising a question. I think it's a little bit connected with Evelyn's also. So I'll try to comment on those two simultaneously. Is regarding the prioritization or the recognition of self-determination and how we ensure the participation, proper and binding participation of affected communities, at least in the Andean region, let's say like in South America. It has to do also with what was mentioned before. At some point, I think there is a lot of I don't know, like there is an idea that our governments or our systems are super unstable, insufficient, that people don't have knowledge, that we don't have knowledge, that everything we do is insufficient. So we need always external intervention in our countries, even when in solidarity. There is also like the idea that communities need always external assistance. And I'd say that there is solidarity support that is needed is something that we actually do, but something that we or communities, I think that definitely don't need is overlapping and like, let's say, a huge number of organizations trying to intervene in the local conditions or in the local dynamics that can produce also like or add to the already existing conflicts. So I think that what's important is to maybe at some point acknowledge that since our countries have a lot of environmental conflicts, not only related to mining, but also energy, salmon farming, different forms of extractivism. At the same time, there is a lot of experience, and our regulations, even though are always insufficient because there's no legal framework like in any country that is enough. I think that we have a lot of experience, and our laws actually can respond to an already existing reality, which is extractivism. And in this sense, I think that what is important is to make these institutions actually be valid and not replaced, for example, by I don't know, like responsible mining standards that do not respond actually to the complexity of brine extraction, for example, or to or that at some point give certifications to mining companies that actually are violating the national laws. So there is a lot of like I think that there is a lot to say to talk about this when it comes to which frameworks have to be respected. And for example, for the European Union, private and voluntary standards are valid, but not necessarily for local communities. So this is something that needs to be respected. And I think that just to finish, what is important is to build local capacities, and that international organizations that want to contribute to local struggles need to also understand and adapt to the local dynamics and to the local networks that already exist and empower them instead of replacing them.
Thank you, Ramon. So that's the question by Sayuri and Red that you just answered, right? Or any other questions as well? That one, okay. I've marked it as answered. Nina, is there a question that you would like to highlight and answer?
Yeah, I have a few. I now had a chance to go through them, and I apologize that these answers are not going to be very organized, but thank you to everyone for the incredible questions. And if I forget something, please feel free to reach out. I was really fascinated by the question by Charlize Tomaselli, which says when to resist mining and when to allow mining. I would like to connect that again to Sayuri Andrade, who highlights that, of course, some communities are in favor of the mining projects. And I think for me, what is really important is indeed allowing the communities to make the decisions for themselves. And I don't think I'm in the position to tell anyone that they either have to mine or that they must not mine. Of course, then there's the entire debate about artisanal mining, which is another complex issue. I think what is crucial is really understanding the right of the people to make their own decisions and to believe that these decisions are informed and not to call them misinformed or uneducated and all of these things that we have seen. And of course, the right to say no as the most important principle that should be included everywhere. Then I think there was one concrete question by J. Lu about the Aarhus Convention in Serbia, which is one legal route related to the protection of the environment. I also wanted to highlight the Berne Convention because that's another process in which the activists in Serbia have been involved. So I do want to say that there are also many legal ways of resisting the mining projects, and the communities and the activists in Serbia have been involved in all of them, in all of the legal ways in which you can challenge the project. They have been involved. But for me, it's also really important looking at resistance more broadly to also understand the limitations of the laws and the legal framework, because so often all of these cases just take years just to get a reply from the secretary of the convention and things like that. But it is definitely an important issue to also sorry, to also highlight. Then one more
Sorry,
thing
which
I
one
want
did you refer to just now?
JLU.
Because I cannot find it. JLU.
It's because I have replied in written, just with a few sentences.
Okay. All right. Continue. Sorry, Nina.
No problem. Then one more thing I wanted to highlight, really important point by Shama Sanduia about deep sea mining. And I think that is really a crucial example of how the extractivist frontiers are just expanding. It's not just the deep sea now, it's also the asteroid mining. I was really shocked to learn that the US has already the entire legal framework for asteroid mining in place as of a few years ago. So just because it's not yet happening commercially, that doesn't mean that there are not the ongoing plans for that to happen. So I think we're really reaching this dystopic future of extractivism everywhere. Not only, it's not going to be about the global north or the global south, but about the deep sea and about the universe and the space. And I think that really opens up also so important questions about not only the human solidarity, but also the more than human solidarity. Because of course, the main argument about the deep sea mining is that, well, you know, there are no pesky communities to resist. So it's easier and the destruction is not so visible. And perhaps finally, a great question by Daniela Vosko-Bojnik, thank you for that. Where would you like to see our networks of solidarity move? I think I also already started to go into that direction, but I wanted to expand on that a little bit and maybe highlight that with the final point by Evelyn Roman on NIMBYism. I think for me, the way forward is really moving away from this reductive understanding of NIMBYism, of not in my backyard, as a sort of almost a selfish way of the local communities. And I think these discourses are getting even stronger with, again, the urgency of the climate change. It's no longer just the case that these communities are being selfish because they are, you know, quote unquote, resisting the mining projects, but now they are almost being presented as basically preventing any climate change mitigation from happening because they're not allowing lithium mines to take place, which of course is absolutely ridiculous. And just to highlight the point that I made previously, I think the way forward is really to focus on the networks also with the climate movement, which luckily are emerging, but are more complex, and to truly fight for the green transition that is going to be really green and not just, you know, painted green, and one that is not only sustainable, but also just, and not only for the human world, but also for the more than human world. I know these are all very easy tasks that I'm just putting out there, but I think the groundwork has already started with so many solidarity networks and such an important work that has been going on in all of the cases that we discussed.
Thank you, Nina. For the last round of answers and to the questions, Mariana, would like to give you the opportunity to select a final or final couple of questions you would like to answer before we wrap up.
Yes, sorry. I agree with Ramon. It's very hard to read all of this and comment. But I briefly replied to J. Lou as well when they ask about the Aarhus Convention. So as Nina said, important, but I didn't add something which is important, is that in Barroso, we have also used all the legal venues, but again, legal or judicial activism has its limitations. And even though there are these legal requirements, as it is put here in this question, countries can deal with it because the delays are, the deadlines are so long and the delays takes for so long. And also the legal frameworks that are usually changed in order for mining. What we're witnessing right now is that legal frameworks are being deregulated or changed, even in the case of Portugal, in order to allow an expediting permitting and funding of these mining projects. And then I see this question, which has not been answered by Kinjal Singh, about the impact of extractivism on already subaltern groups, for example, women. I can reply to that also, linking it to the Barroso case, where we see women are at the front lines and forefront of resistance, and the impacts that are already happening. I showed some photos of ecological, environmental impacts, but I would say that the most profound impact that extractivism has, even before any material extraction exists, is the emotional, the affective impact that the presence of mining companies and their instigation of divisions and of manipulation, and the halt that is put into a possibility of a future creates. And I see that of course, across all genders and classes and all of the social indicators, but with women, in Barroso, I do see that this impact is stronger, also because social reproduction is usually still conducted most by women, and so the emotional labor, the emotional work needed for resistance is usually also on their shoulders, and so indeed this profound affective emotional impact is of extractivism, even before any material extraction can already be felt. Then there is a question specifically also about Portugal and the local elections.
We don't really have time anymore. I'm very sorry, Mariana.
Can I then just say one thing? Because a lot of questions, when I was trying to debunk all those myths, it is because they tie to a lot of these questions. And I think what is really needed is new narratives, new imaginaries. Nina and Ramon also brilliantly put it, but I'm stressing this again. We need to debunk all of these myths that we need more lithium, that we need more extractivism, that we need more sacrifice. Because actually we don't. If we would have complete different reorientations of what our goals and what our lives would look like, our conversations would be completely different. So I would also suggest us to move away from the discourse of the green transition, and that is a great question that was put by Danielle, I cannot pronounce the surname, but the co-option of this discourse is already such in a way that I would suggest us to move away also from the concept of transition and to reclaim something more radical, such as transformation, for example, and really embrace the complexity. So really to move away from this reductive focus that just narrowly focus on climate or narrowly puts blocks and transform nature into small dots, and really connect the dots across struggles and across territories. Yeah.
That's a great conclusion to end the webinar. We've reached the end. Apologies to the participants whose questions were not answered, but I believe it is possible to reach out to the panelists through their institutional email addresses. Not sure if it will be shared. Maybe Irina can say something about that. Yeah, so that's it for me. Thank you, again to the panelists. Everybody. It was great to connect these 3 different case studies across the world and showing how important international solidarity is to achieve resource justice. Irina, go ahead.
Yeah, pretty much everything was said. I'm just here to say the final word. I don't know why. It's a hierarchical problem that we are reproducing, but really, like I absolutely enjoyed hearing all this. And please, this is just the beginning of our work together, and in academic terms. And if you want to find out more about the project, we have a website, we have a LinkedIn, we have a YouTube program, so you can reach out to and continue monitoring what these projects are doing. Again, many thanks, and we have the next webinar on the 28th this month. It will be probably just as interesting as this one. So again, thank you so much for all your work together, and keep up the good resistance.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.